And first item on the agenda is a roll call.
Thank you, Linda. Diane, I will call the roll. Please say here when your name is called. Councilmember Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Boland.
Here.
Commissioner Felt.
Here.
Commissioner Fern.
Here.
Commissioner Gordon.
Here.
Commissioner Hull.
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman.
Here.
Commissioner Nahidi.
Here.
Commissioner Parsons.
Here.
Commissioner Sims.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Commissioner Dolan.
Here.
Sergeant Bill Clock.
Here.
Commissioner Lazarus.
Here.
Commissioner Margolis.
Here.
Commissioner Webb. Commissioner Hess.
Here.
We have a quorum and nearly perfect
You're
attendance.
so close. So close. For the
Just
first
our
time.
RTA representative.
All right, does anybody have any additions or corrections for the agenda? Then I'll take a motion to approve. Okay, seconded by,
Trudeau.
okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we have an agenda. The next item is public comment, and we allow 3 minutes per speaker. And Kayla will keep track of that time. So who would like to speak? All right.
Hi again. My name is Clark Chernesky. I live in Ann Arbor. And I'm authorized to speak tonight for the Michigan Association of Railroad Passengers. I want to talk to you about the Ann Arbor Station study. I want to first of all thank the City Council for their approval the other night of an extension, modification of the contract for the station study so that it can be continued and wrapped up. A few council members who dissented in that said that that study has been a waste of money because the station may not get built where it may get built. And I just want to mention that I was looking over the study today. It's about 1,000 pages, I think, the whole thing with appendices. And 8 locations were looked at. Now, when a large amount of federal money may be used on a project, they, in this case, the Federal Rail Administration, insists that various alternatives be examined. You don't want to put your money in something and you say, well, why didn't you do something else that would have been a lot cheaper? So that required an alternative analysis, traffic studies, and so forth. And this would have to be done regardless of where or exactly what size the station would be. So I would disagree very much with the idea that this has been a waste of money, because no matter what comes out of this in the end, this type of study, studying traffic, ridership, facilities, locations, stuff, would have to be made. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Anyone? All right.
Before you turn the timer on, let me just ask, I'm interested in commenting on the revision to the calming procedure that came across my computer during the day, and I thought I'd better come down because I'd like to say something about it. So would it be better if I speak later at the time that is discussed, or now?
Now is the time for the public, yes.
Okay, you can start the timer. I'm Dave Sponseller. I live on Antietam, 1 block north of Blewett, where the big calming study was carried on this year. And I'd like to point out a glaring error in the setup of the whole calming procedure. And that error is to jump right from nothing into speed bumps and humps and bump outs and raised crosswalks and things like that, instead of looking, first of all, at the signage in the area. And the recent Blewett study is a good time to think of that. The whole thing there would have been avoided the need to block out the North Nixon people in all those new subdivisions that usually were driving past Clegg as a shortcut on the way to Detroit or wherever. When they turned east to go past Clegg School, there was zero indication that there was a school in the zone. A terrible lack. And then when I got to the school, there was a crossing mark, and that was it. There was not one thing, and I've taken videos of this. And even on over to Blewett, going on the Green Road, where people worried about speeding, there was almost no signage. Whereas Kathy and I have relatives in Ohio. We spend a lot of time there. And Ohio does it much better. Every lane approaching a school, and if it's 2 lanes, there are 2 signs, has 6-foot-long letters of school. And because the driver is always looking at the roadway, he sees this. He may not be looking at the side area to pick up signs there, but if he sees school straight ahead of him, he can't miss it, and it helps to alert the driver to the fact that he's approaching the school. And then the sign, often with blinking lights, indicates a 20-mile speed limit, not 25. And there's a big difference in safety between, around children, between 25 and 20. So I would encourage you, before passing this on to council to approve, to deal with this terrible lack of signage. It's really, I think, so sad that a child lost his life a year and a half ago or whenever, probably because there was no signage, adequate signage near Huron High. Yes, since then, the signs have appeared, but not in time. So I would take a serious look at the organization of the calming procedure and do signs first before you impose the nuisance on drivers of bumps and things. And also, they should let people that live more than just, I live a block north of Blewett. I had no vote in this issue, and yet I can't get out of my subdivision without driving on Blewett. So they should expand the vote area and let people within several blocks of the area
All right, thank you very much.
do this. Thank you.
Appreciate your input. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? All right, then the public commentary is closed. We have minutes to review. Any changes or corrections to the minutes? All right, then I'll take a motion to approve the minutes. Okay, if you say your name, it's helpful. All right. And seconded by? Okay. All those in favor? Say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. And we have minutes for last time. After the minutes, we go into business. And the first one is the e-scooter update, and so Raymond's going to give us that information.
Yes, Madam Chair. I think we spoke a little bit about this at the last meeting because it was shortly after the deployment of Bird, the e-scooter company that came to town in early September. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of an update in terms of what's happened in the last month or so. So first of all, what we wanted to do is coordinate as closely as possible with our partners. So we convened meetings with the RIDE, AAATA. We convened meetings with University of Michigan, as well as the Downtown Development Authority, just to kind of really figure out what some of the considerations may be as this new form of mobility came to our community. And so what you have in your backup is kind of a running list of some of the items that we're tracking related to e-scooters and this new mobility option. And so there's no real firm decision yet in terms of how we're going to move forward with this. What I will say is we have drafted, the legal department as well as the city administrator's office with the new assistant city administrator, John Fournier, have put together an interim operating agreement that is for 3 months. has some stipulations that kind of outline how those scooter companies would operate, what the licensing fee is, and things of that nature. And so many of the considerations that I'm going to go over here, many of which were brought up at the last meeting here as well, were baked into that operating agreement. And so really what we're trying to do is kind of monitor the first 3 months through that operating agreement, see how well it goes. My understanding is that agreement is slated to go before council with Bird in November. And so I'll just quickly go through the list that's in your backup. So, one of the first considerations was where they can be operated. I think when the scooters first deployed, there was some ambiguity in state laws to whether or not they were allowed to operate in the road, on the sidewalk, bike lane, so forth and so on. Our current interpretation of both state and federal, or state and local code is that they're not permitted on sidewalks because they are considered a motorized vehicle, but they are allowed to operate in the street. And so that's kind of where that stands right now. But again, that's going to be one of those things that we're going to continue to monitor. Then we went into discussions about the regulation, just as a company. Right now we have, again, this interim operating agreement, but long term that might look like a different model. There are different permitting or licensing agreements, or is it something that we want to procure service similar to we've done Arbor Bike in the past, where you have a licensed vendor that takes care of it for the whole city. So some of those discussions will kind of play out probably next year as we kind of go through this first 3 months. There is a quantity limitation in the operating agreement right now. The draft calls for a cap of 200 per company. And so that's the cap that right now is written into the agreement. Places like Detroit have put a total cap. They put caps on the companies as well as a total cap in the entire community as well. We don't have such a threshold established just yet, but it might be something for consideration. There have been other e-scooter companies that have expressed interest in coming to the community, so it's one of those things that we'll just, again, have to monitor to see if there's a right amount for our area. Enforcement, so forcing compliance of both users and companies, and a new issue that has come up, and Sergeant Clark can attest to this, is apparently there have been some civil disputes between scooter operators and those who have taken possession of the scooter onto private property, and those that have come to pick them up to charge them. And so this was, again, kind of something that we didn't anticipate, was kind of a new thing, and something we're trying to, again, monitor. Confiscating scooters, we talked a little bit about this last time. Currently, right now, the city's approach is, and again, others can correct me if I'm wrong, we're really, scooters that are posing the most egregious kind of threat in terms of mobility, in other words, if it's blocking the sidewalk, if it's in the middle of the road, that is when scooters are being confiscated or impounded. But for the most part, if they're in the sidewalk and they're out of, the pedestrian realm and not obstructing kind of pedestrian traffic or, vehicle traffic, bicycle traffic, whatever the case may be, they're allowed to be parked wherever they kind of fit. There's been some discussion about speed, both in terms of not just the speed of scooters themselves. They go roughly 15 miles per hour. So, there's a concern there if they're operating on the sidewalk, which, as we said earlier, they shouldn't be. But, the mix of speed between slower moving vehicles such as pedestrians, but also on the other end of the spectrum, if they're operating in the roadway, the speed differential between the scooters and the vehicles themselves. So again, something that we want to pay attention to and kind of observe. Talked a little bit about the parking and storage and how we've confiscated some that haven't been parked properly and have kind of encroached in the roadway or encroached in the right-of-way in a way that has posed a threat. We've talked a little bit about how we can encourage other safety aspects such as helmet use, making sure that people are visible when they're on them. The Bird scooters are equipped with lights and reflective materials, but is there a way during nighttime operations to make people even more visible? Looking at other communities, some have instituted training programs as part of the app itself, so that when you sign up for a scooter maybe for the first time, the app, it will tell you kind of how the scooter should be operated. And that's one of the things that we're looking to other communities to see how they've done that and how that can be rolled out as part of the deployment. And then the last set of points are really operational considerations. So making sure there's a local point of contact, that there's insurance requirements that are met, indemnification clauses met, that there's regular maintenance and inspection, that the scooters are operational to the point of what's expected by the users. Some companies have a revenue sharing where they actually will put money into a pot that goes to sidewalk repair or road repair, so then that way it, again, facilitates the operation of the scooters. Some places have also had, they call it geofencing, areas where scooters can or cannot be operated, and so there are ways to encourage that or even discourage certain use based on where a scooter's checked out from or where it's parked at. And so that's something, long-term for consideration, but right now there are no restrictions on that. On a similar note, some companies also rebalance throughout the day. The idea is if you have a cluster of scooters that have, all congregated in a certain spot, but there's still needs throughout the community, how do you kind of redistribute those throughout? This is a common issue with like bike shares and other systems where, again, people kind of head in one direction and how you can get them rebalanced. Some of that also has to do with how do we make sure we're serving kind of the greatest population, especially those that might be disenfranchised, might be lower income populations, maybe those that don't have access to credit cards or smartphones. What opportunities do people like those have? In other communities do have certain, I think in Detroit, for example, when Bird and Lime came, they made sure that there was an opportunity to check out scooters using other forms rather than just a smartphone. A lot of public agencies, including us, are always interested in seeing if there's any any data we can gather that can help inform future decisions. So, for example, if they show us what routes are being taken, that could help us inform where there is desire lines for future infrastructure, especially bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. And then lastly, many of the first deployments of these e-scooters were in warm weather climates, Santa Monica and the Southwest and West Coast. Now these companies are targeting the Midwest and colder climates, and it's uncertain what winter operation will look like. We don't even know if they wish to continue to operate through the winter, but obviously winter poses several different challenges in terms of the battery life. Where we typically store snow is in that furniture zone sometimes, and when you plow it up onto kind of the curb space where a lot of times these scooters are being parked. And then how well do they handle in icy conditions with the small wheelbase and what have you. So these are all the issues that we are tracking. I know Commissioner Trudeau had brought up several as well. Hopefully this captures a lot of them. I think there are probably some others that we probably missed, but these are the issues that we're tracking. These are the different things that we're monitoring during this initial 3-month pilot period. And then we'll kind of reevaluate after that 3 months to see where we go from there.
All right, thank you. We have a little time for questions before we talk about the committee, which will be a larger look at that issue. And we have the charter for that committee. Hopefully you've looked it over. But any other quick questions for it? Yes.
I have a quick one. So when you say on the street, does that mean in the bike lane if there is one, or does that mean not in the bike lane?
So I think the scooters have ushered in a broader thought process that will make all of our jobs a little bit harder. I think you have to consider whether somebody going 15 miles an hour belongs on the sidewalk or not. And if not, then how do we allocate the space between the curbs? And that may mean losing vehicle parking to accommodate better multi-use lanes for alternative transportation. Because scooters are really the tip of the iceberg. You'll see things like tricycles, adult tricycles coming. You'll see things like mopeds, and those things most likely don't belong on the sidewalk. So the commission here will have to look at all those, make some recommendations so council can adopt policies, which in turn will probably change the way we look at our capital improvement program, particularly in the downtown, because if you want people to not be on the sidewalk, whether it's on scooters, tricycles, bicycles, or mopeds, then we're going to have to provide safe facilities so the average user feels safe and protected from motor vehicles. So that's what the future holds for us. Bird has sort of brought the future to us a little faster than we might have otherwise thought, but that's the consideration that we're going to look to the commission for some advice.
All right.
Is access to data included in the 3-month agreement that we have currently?
My understanding is, I don't believe the one with Bird, they haven't shared any data with us yet. And I can't remember if the draft agreement, and it is still draft, if it has a data sharing. In our initial discussions with Lime was much more forthcoming about sharing that data. But I haven't seen the platform that Bird was willing to share in terms of what that data would look like.
We should try to make them share their data.
I had a quick question, which was I wondered where the number 200 came from in limiting the number of scooters.
Well, my understanding is, admittedly, we probably got the idea from some other communities. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the limit that Detroit set. It was 200 per company with a total community allocation of 600, so pretty much allowed for 3 different companies to come. And again, not because this is so new, it's hard to know which is just right. Is 200 too little, too much, not enough? So I think it's somewhat arbitrary, but based on looking at what some of the other trends were.
How many did they drop?
200.
Okay. Zach?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A quick question about process. Do you envision that this body would review and City Council would pass an ordinance governing these types of uses, and that we would produce some kind of a template operating agreement with vendors? Or are we going to be exclusively regulating this through contracts?
Well, I think that's the interesting part of the next discussion item, which is kind of a micromobility committee or subcommittee that can kind of talk through these in a bigger picture issue. Because I think, as Mr. Lazarus just stated, I think e-scooters are just one of multiple things that are probably headed our way. And instead of trying to chase whatever the next technology is or whatever the next deployment is, maybe we can come up with a more holistic approach, and whether that's ordinance, whether that's licensing, whether that's procurement. I don't think I have the answer just yet. I think we'll look to this commission and some suggestions in terms of what they think.
So with the assumption that that'll be a long process, in the interim, do you envision regulating this through individual operating agreements with particular companies?
That's why it's a 3-month. So for that first 3 months, we'll kind of observe what's going on. That's kind of meant to be the stopgap measure on that, and then after the 3 months, I guess we'd have to make a decision as to whether or not that's renewed, whether that we start transitioning to a different model to regulate or whatever the case may be.
Okay. And hopefully the winter will give us some time to get it right if these operations do take a pause.
So question, with regard to impound, whose responsibility or right is it to sort of retrieve those scooters? Is it the company directly? And is there a sort of fee or fine to take it out of impound?
Yes and yes. So what's interesting is we've confiscated about 40, I believe, scooters or thereabouts, that, especially with the initial deployment, they were just kind of not parked very well. And so I think, when we had initial discussions with Bird, I think they kind of readjusted the strategy a little bit. There were several people that showed up to our facility, our Public Works facility down on Wheeler Road, trying to reclaim the scooters, who are just so Bird incentivizes users to retrieve scooters and charge them on their own, as opposed to having kind of Bird staff members do it. And so we had several iterations of people coming, trying to get the scooters, and we said, no, they're impounded. They have to be retrieved by the company. There is a fee associated with getting them back as well. I don't know that off the top of my head, but it is baked into that agreement.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess I'll just follow up with a comment that it seems like, in order to sort of have the power or even know what the city wants to have in that contract or future contracts, it seems like maybe it's a time for us to try to come up with a framework for this and future types of these modes of transportation, sort of maybe it's already too late, but maybe we need to find the right framework so that we can understand what the city's desires and needs are, and then we can therefore put those into future contracts. But if we, it's sort of like, what power do we have to sort of say, well, this is the ordinance, and so this needs to be part of the future contract, such as maybe seasonal pickup when this plows come out, or, stipulation for local ordinances and instruction as part of that process, saying like, well, this is what we require, put that in the contract, and you can sign it, sort of thing.
Right.
So I guess just a comment.
Yeah, and even if we don't get it exactly right after the 3 months, we have an opportunity to put new things into that operating agreement, right? So if things weren't looking exactly right, we can put things in, we can take things out, maybe extend it for another 3 months, again, not knowing, until we want to move to a more permanent solution.
So some of the questions come into committee work, I
Right.
would hope.
Yeah, I think so.
And so if it's okay with, we can segue into the committee, and you have a copy of the proposed charter. So if you had any additions or suggestions for that, or if you think, like, for example, the points that you just brought up about what to write into the contract, I think that's covered by the charter, but if you have any other ideas for that committee, and we have 2 volunteers already to serve on the committee. So any reactions, or Scott?
One of the aspects of the committee charter is to have a representative from the Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition. Have we talked to them, or have they expressed interest in sitting on it, or are we just intending to try to recruit from that organization?
I did talk to them at the last board meeting, and there was lots of interest at the meeting, but no follow-up.
Okay.
But I think that there is interest, yes.
And if there are any members of the public who would be interested, do we want to create the potential for that, like we did with the, the traffic calming committee, or are we comfortable? I don't have a strong opinion here, but I'm curious if that would make sense, or to have it be a WBWC or at-large public member if somebody from that organization isn't interested.
I would welcome public members, but we have not identified anybody at this point.
Okay.
Did we leave that out? Kayla and I developed this, so, okay, we can add in a public member. If, 'cause I think that's a good idea.
Because of the integrated nature with the university's campus, I know you had one representative, and absolutely we will. Being the representative on this commission for the university, it'll either be me or a delegate.
That'd be great.
So I think otherwise, I think this is a pretty good scope, and I think it'll be great to have a public engagement point for this conversation to happen with the city. So I'm excited about kicking this off and participating in it. The one thing I just want to comment on, to echo back to the point Commissioner Lazarus made, which is sort of there's the sort of the issue of these operators and these shared platforms, and then there's the issue of the different vehicle types. And my sense is this is primarily about figuring out how to regulate the operators. And I think sort of the question about the different vehicle types and how we regulate those uses in the roads is sort of a separate question, because these can be obviously owned by private citizens and owned and operated in other ways. And I don't know if we want to start that process now separately, or whether we just want to let that remain a little bit ambiguous while we figure out the set of questions around the operators, since that's a little bit more pressing. And again, I'm curious if people have opinions on that, or if the city does.
And I think that the larger point is that we don't want to just look at e-scooters, because that is just the beginning of something quite interesting. And so the committee really is looking at the larger planning issues. Yeah.
So, and I think it's, we should be thinking about the scope and what's the mobility issue we're trying to solve, meaning, I think I brought it up last time, right now my sense is they're replacing is typically a walking and biking trip, and is that what we want it to do, or do we want an extension of transit? You know, those are the kind of things I think this committee could be really helpful with, kind of identifying how we want the network to operate.
So there's only so much space in the city's right-of-way, and how that's allocated probably needs to be a bit flexible as opposed to the rigid thinking we've had in the past. And, you know, we've started to look at streets providing different functions at different times of day, specifically in the downtown. Because if we don't do that, we're always going to be chasing technology, and technology changes a whole lot faster than our ability to change the physical world. So that kind of flexibility is part of the conversation. I think the business arrangements with operators are things that I think the input's valuable, but the expertise of this commission is on the second part of that, which is how do we use the limited real estate we have to accommodate the demands as they fluctuate, you know, time of day, day of the week, and time of the year. And that's what I'm really excited about getting back from the Transportation Commission.
Okay. And so Molly is the other person who has volunteered to be on that committee?
I just actually had a couple
Yeah.
quick things to say, if that's okay. I think to your point, Commissioner Trudeau, I don't think we're going to be able to talk about regulating the operators without also regulating the vehicles, at least a little bit, because I think it's going to be mixed up. Whether we want to make that explicit in the charge or not, I think we're going to end up with some recommendations that are about the vehicles and not about the operators. And then I also had a question about the draft license agreement, whether the Transportation Commission will be able to see that, not necessarily to approve it, but to see what's in it so we can understand what we're starting from in terms of those agreements with the operators. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, that won't be a problem. You know, again, it's going to be public record here when it hits the city council agenda anyway, so
Okay.
It's something that we can definitely share with you.
So if there's other comments, you can certainly send them to the committee once it is existing. But unless there's something pressing, I would go ahead and take a motion to empower this committee with the change. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, one small note in the composition. I really appreciate the scope of work. I think it's great, and I appreciate the volunteers. The one member from the Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition, I'm a little bit uncomfortable reserving a spot on a public committee for a private entity, and so I'd be more comfortable if that read one member of the public or one representative of the public, and trust the wisdom of this board to look to the Walking and Biking Coalition as a great place for recruitment to happen. But I don't want to reserve it in the charter for a private entity.
Okay, I'm comfortable.
So I'd make a motion to move forward with this subcommittee with the amendment that the composition read one representative of the public or one member of the public, however staff feels the wording would be best put forward.
Okay, so moved.
To that point, as a board member of WVWC, I'm totally fine if that comes out. I would like to have the opportunity, though, to maybe have more than just one public member. It was really useful to have multiple when we were doing the traffic calming. So up to whatever that number is, and if we don't reach that number, that's fine. But up to 3?
Up
to 2?
That would be friendly. So
Molly maybe can think about.
I would change my motion to the charter for the subcommittee as written, with the change that up to 3 representatives or public members of the public.
All right, and we will bring them back for approval in the November meeting.
Great.
A second to that motion? Okay. Brad? All in
Who was it?
favor?
I'm sorry. Who was the second?
Brad
Brad,
Parsons.
thank you.
So all in favor, say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, we have another committee. We've had such great committees up until now. Thank you. I think it'll be very interesting. The next item is about our annual report. And essentially, we have an outline there, and we're looking for your input right now, if there are additional items for the annual report. And then we would have, hopefully at least 2 volunteers from the commission that will work with Kayla to put that together. And I'm one of the volunteers to do that. And so it may not involve any meetings at all, but some research and some writing. So we have a good outline to start with.
I would be happy to do that.
Okay. Any other additions to that or suggestions for the annual report?
I've been thinking about some of the documents prior to the Transportation Commission that have been really useful in some of our subcommittees, for instance, the Pedestrian Task Force. Oh, you know what, I'm thinking of the new council member thing, not our yearly, sorry, wrong topic.
But we'll definitely be referencing it, so that's.
Okay.
Any other additions? I take it you like what we came up with, okay. So I guess I'll go ahead and take a motion that Robert and I will be responsible for creating that annual report. And can you remind me of did we have a deadline, Kayla?
There's no stated deadline in the
Okay.
ordinance. It just says to provide an annual report. I think that maybe trying to wrap it up by the end of this calendar year, 2018, would be a good target. Well, I'll defer to the commissioners that are working on it, what's reasonable, but
So
I think trying to prepare a 2018
go for
report.
December meeting.
Yeah, to bring it to the December
draft.
meeting, I think would be
Okay.
great. And then it could go to city council in January.
Okay. So the motion is that your chair and vice chair prepare a draft annual report to be presented at the December meeting.
I'll move
Okay,
that.
and seconded by? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, it's passed then. And I think that will be a really nice historical document as well, which is part of the suggestions of what I put in there, including who has served on this commission. There's been so many people in and out. All right, then we go to the new council member orientation discussion. And the format that we believe is that we can put together 1 or 2 slides for that official orientation, and then we can also set up a by invitation gathering, and council members will not be under any obligation to attend. And we have to make sure to keep it under a quorum. And then we would just basically talk about what we've been doing in a little bit more detail than the 1 or 2 slides would present. So that they have an idea of some of the people involved and also the tasks that we're involved with. So that'll be after the election, obviously, probably in December. And so there'll be probably 1 meeting to prepare and 1 meeting where hopefully some of the council members will be able to make it. Any comments or discussions or volunteers? Well, I'd like to volunteer for that. I think it's fairly important to bring people on as soon as possible.
I'd be willing to help you with that.
Great.
I can also, if you think it would be beneficial with all the subcommittee work I've been,
I think that you would be a particularly beneficial person, yes.
I can make that happen.
I withdraw.
Oh. We can have 3.
We can have 3.
No, I'm fine. I think 2 is enough, right?
It's,
I will be happy to serve on the committee, even with, yes, in my capacity as I can.
great, then we'll set up a an initial meeting for next month after the election. I don't think we need to vote on that unless somebody feels otherwise. And we'll give you a report as to what happens. Okay, then we have some information and discussion. No, we're going to traffic calming. And so Kayla can explain to you where we are, and we actually do have a resolution to vote on regarding traffic calming.
So I'll share an update of what's taken place since, let's see, it was the August 15th Transportation Commission meeting where there was a recommendation put forward to City Council that City Council accept the proposed updated program. That was a recommendation that the Transportation Commission made. At the October 1st City Council meeting, City Council did not approve, in fact, they denied the update of the traffic calming program. And in response to the council member feedback that was shared at the October 1st meeting, staff has prepared a revised program update, trying to incorporate some of that feedback that we've heard. And what we've provided in your agenda materials, a late addition to your agenda materials, I apologize, that came to you a couple days ago. And that showed the revised program update in a clean version and a track changes version so you could see what had changed from one to the next. And then also the draft resolution that we would bring to City Council for them to potentially take action. So that's a revised resolution from what was brought to the October 1st meeting. So I would like to hit on a couple of the highlights of what has changed in the program, what we heard from the commissioners, or the council members, I apologize, what has changed in the program update, and then if the Transportation Commission would like to make a motion related to this revised program update, we could move into that next. If that, does that work for you all?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we had heard from council members at the October 1st meeting was concern about the level of public involvement in the traffic calming program was one of the concerns. Also concern about how safety issues would be addressed outside of the traffic calming program. And there was an impression that that would not include a separate engagement effort or that it would be an inadequate engagement effort. And concern that City Council approval of individual traffic calming projects, that removing that City Council approval would remove Council's voice in the traffic calming program. So there were a couple of other comments made at the October 1st meeting during the traffic calming discussion that seemed to be sort of outside of what the traffic calming program is focused on, but I think it's worth acknowledging because it was a primary discussion item, was about the resolution, so R-18-275. It had come through the Transportation Commission in, I believe, August as well, and then went to City Council. And that was related to the engagement strategy for street improvement projects. So that was a primary discussion topic. That is separate from the traffic calming program. And then also a number of examples were cited about insufficient community engagement on recent street resurfacing or safety improvement projects. So those are many of the concerns that were noted. And in response to that, we worked on a program update, a revised program update, mostly focusing on the item around the safety issues, since that was a particular area of interest. So we wanted to better explain the rationale of why certain safety concerns should be handled outside of the traffic calming program and how the engagement strategy, what that would look like in terms of community engagement for those safety concerns. So I won't read it all to you. It's in the materials that we provided, though I can pull it up on screen if it's helpful to look more closely. Particularly just the need for items that are a documented safety concern to have professional engineering staff, city administrator, and or city council making decisions about how to address safety concerns and not to leave that entirely to the community polling process that happens through the traffic calming program. But we did clarify in the program outline that this would not eliminate community engagement in those, in the safety concern projects. So we've outlined that staff would then determine the appropriate public engagement strategy based on the scale of the project using the city's community engagement toolkit, notify the traffic calming project area that a documented safety concern has been observed and share with the project area the next steps in the engagement strategy, and then proceed with the remainder of that traffic calming project area, setting aside the discussion of that safety concern area. So that's intended to be able to to respect the petitioner who submitted, the petitioner and all of the neighbors who signed a petition who are interested in having traffic calming studied in their neighborhood, to keep that moving forward while if there is a safety concern. And so some of the examples of safety concerns could be a critical sight distance problem, a non-motorized travel need, the presence of sensitive travel populations such as a primary route for elderly persons or children, or also a documented crash pattern, that those things would be taken out of the traffic calming program to address, and then addressed through this separate process, though still maintaining public engagement. So those are, the main change, I would say. In a few other areas, we made changes to further emphasize that this is a resident-driven process and that a high level of public engagement is maintained. In fact, there's at least as much public engagement in the proposed program update as there is in the current existing program. There's still an initial questionnaire, 2 meetings with the residents, and a final polling process. Certain project areas may go above and beyond. In fact, with Blewett, under our existing program, we did have a 3rd public engagement meeting, and we intend to incorporate additional meetings as needed depending on the project area. But we did not, this program update does not reduce the amount of public involvement in the traffic calming program. So those are some of the changes, and I will hand it over if there's anything, the opportunity for Mr. Lazarus, Councilmember Ackerman, Raymond, anybody if you need to add in it, if I missed anything critical with the update.
I can respond to questions, but I think Kayla outlined all the concerns that were raised.
Okay.
So if we want to move into Transportation Commission questions or thoughts about the proposed update, that was the revised proposed update that's been shared.
Yes.
One thing I'm wondering is,
There you go.
yeah, so one thing I'm wondering is, it seems like some language about says city council has authority over traffic calming program updates and approval, and stuff like that is being stricken, and that just seems a little odd. I'm wondering why, in part because it seems like that was one of the city council concerns with it, and that's being stricken in the new language.
Thank you, Commissioner Hull. Good reminder. And that has not been removed in the proposal. It's just been moved from the program update attachments to the resolution. So you'll see it in the draft resolution. There are 2 resolved clauses that model the same language that had been in the program update. And so that move is because that was an item of council member concern, and we weren't clear where the complete council stood on that. And this provides the opportunity that council could modify the resolution and strike certain resolved clauses.
So they can't amend what we send them, the recommendation?
It's a lot cleaner if it's more simple to revise and amend on the floor if it's in a resolved clause.
Okay.
Maybe Mr. Lazarus can better.
Yeah, if I can add, the traffic calming guidelines are a technical document. They outline how the program is to be run. The resolution that establishes it is a policy statement that council establishes by the resolution. So the concern over how deeply the council approves traffic calming projects is still something that they're going to want to discuss. So it makes more sense to put it into the enabling resolution than in the actual technical document. And I would suspect that when this comes back, that will be one of the primary items of discussion. I think staff's done an excellent job of addressing concerns that came up about the engagement process, and there was some confusion about traffic calming, which is largely discretionary, versus safety improvements, which are an engineer's responsibility to fix. And then we also have talked to the public schools about those things that are done, either as safe routes to school programs or other requests that are outside of traffic calming. And I think those three things together lended some confusion as to what's traffic calming and what's not. And I think that's been straightened out in the revised program.
Okay. So from that, I also was thinking that the comment that we had from the audience earlier was a school matter. And my understanding is that state law actually regulates signage and especially speed limits around schools, and that would not be part of the traffic calming ordinance either.
School zones have to
is
be
that correct?
requested by the school district.
Right.
And we work well with them in doing that. You want to?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the signage in particular. So Mr. Lazarus is absolutely right. School zones are established at the request of the school. And that pertains to both public schools as well as private schools. And we get those, from time to time. We just got a couple this summer, actually, at the beginning of the school year. Then there are other types of things that regulate things such as parking. Some of that is controlled, by the motor vehicle code and where you can and can't park and, how you can operate a vehicle. But then other things are through traffic control orders. So where you have, no parking because of, one we just processed, for example, was someone who had a special needs child. The bus was having a hard time servicing that address. And so we had to put in no parking on one side of the street to allow the bus to access that property. So there are a lot of different flavors out there in terms of when signs are needed, when they are required to be put up, and when they're a little bit more discretionary in nature. But almost all the signs that we do are regulated through, and I think many of you are familiar with the manual on uniform traffic control devices. There's a state version, which is the Michigan manual on uniform traffic control devices, and so we have to follow that in order to be compliant with both state and federal regulations.
Thanks. Zach?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for addressing the member of the public's question. I think maybe just to get to the point a little bit more, should the traffic calming program update move forward, would staff, in conversation with neighbors, look to use signage as a possible solution for mitigating traffic safety concerns?
I think signage can definitely be in the toolbox. The one thing that I'll say is that, oftentimes signs in and of themselves don't necessarily lead to changed behavior. They could, but they don't always. And so I think it's really just trying to figure out what the best solution is. So, oftentimes, especially under the existing program, the traffic calming program, there's been a petition among the neighborhood. So there's already an observed problem among the neighborhood. And the other part is the qualifying criteria now is there has to be a speeding problem, right? There's an 85th percentile speed. With the exception of one of the traffic calming programs, all the other traffic calming programs, as I understand it, have met that. And so that being said, there's probably a higher degree of engineering solutions beyond signage that have been considered in the past. That's not to say that signage, can't address some problems, but I think there is some signage can get you so far in terms of influencing behavior.
And I appreciate that, and I think I'd be inclined to agree with you, as with most engineers, that really, changing behavior can really boils down to changing the infrastructure that we use. But I think it's nonetheless an important conversation to have with neighbors, as we look at our full suite of options and our full toolkit.
Right.
So if we could focus on the resolution a little bit. Go ahead, Scott.
I just had a question about the traffic safety improvements that sort of are dealt with outside of the traffic calming process. So my understanding is those are the kinds of things that if they were to come to the city's attention via any vector, that they would be dealt with in that way by the city. So if the city becomes aware of a particular safety issue that's appropriate for the traffic engineers to address directly, the city would address them. So this is really just acknowledging what the practice of the city is for that class of problem. Okay, so it's not like it's not like you have to start the traffic calming process to get the city to notice these kinds of problems. It's just highlighting that. can happen throughout the course of the process. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
you're absolutely
Okay,
correct.
great.
Yeah, and some of those issues can be brought up through numerous different ways. We will often get concerns from citizens about particularly, concerning intersection or whatever the case may be. That's one thing. We do sometimes road safety audits where we'll get, a team of professionals together and kind of walk the corridor and see what the conditions are. Sometimes we'll get them from a partner agency like the schools. Will often come to us and say, this condition could be improved if this comes through. And so if we feel like there's an issue that needs to be addressed, especially a lot of times these aren't on neighborhood streets, they're on, collectors or arterials, those are ones that we feel compelled to address, because they've been brought to our attention in one way, shape, or form. But then the neighborhood calming traffic program is really focused on, a citizen-driven process on local neighborhood streets. And so that one is a little bit more confined in terms of the applicability, and that's the intent of where those kind of overlap is, but at the same time, the distinction between what falls under neighborhood traffic calming versus what may happen through other engineering solutions that we come up with.
So are there questions or comments about the resolution? Yes.
I'm just going to say that I support the resolution and openly advocate for us supporting it, going to council pretty much as is. But I do want to provide some context, particularly to the gentleman who spoke earlier, that in the context of these discussions, I very much understand where you're coming from because I am also coming from that standpoint. 20 miles an hour in school zones was considered, and it would need an exemption from Michigan state law in order to do that. Not to say that we can't explore that, but this venue didn't seem like the right place for that. The other thing I want to mention is that discussions about signage, education, enforcement, all of those things did come up in our discussions, and we have agreed to explore that further as we move the discussion further with traffic calming solutions on a second level, moving more towards a neighborhood approach and trying to expand how we treat neighborhoods. So I understand where you're coming from, and this is not the end point. This is just a step, I think, very much in the right direction. It's a much better program for neighborhoods than the existing, and there's still room to move forward. And I'm happy to speak to you if on the side if you'd like to.
Any other comments about the resolution? Would you like to make a motion then?
Make a motion to approve.
Okay, seconded by?
Trudeau.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have unanimous vote once again. Thank you. It's an agreeable bunch. Great, then we have a presentation that fits nicely in terms of where to go next, which is with the Ann Arbor Public Schools. And I believe both Liz and Ray are going to be presenting on this. Have we asked you to present at every meeting you've attended so far?
Kayla, remind me.
Can you use the arrow keys?
Just use the, okay, great, thanks. Well, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to give you an update on what has transpired since last spring, I should say, and throughout the summer with the Ann Arbor schools. And Raymond is going to sort of tag team on a few of the issues that the public school district has worked with the city. And so, no further ado, let's see here. Just want to talk briefly about many of our summer safety improvements that we did this year, and lead off with probably, admittedly, one of the more controversial ones, and that was at Huron High School. One of our goals in the district is to provide a safe campus, and the safe campus means safe for our walkers, our bikers, the drivers, and the buses. And one of the sort of standards in that is looking at how traffic interacts at drop-off and pickup. And we have had a very dangerous situation at Huron for a number of years. especially off the Huron Parkway entrance, where we had buses and cars and walkers intermingling. A couple of students actually bumped, and car accidents as cars weaved in between buses, and it was just a very dangerous situation. So we actually hired OHM traffic consultants to come out, and they did an assessment last year. They came on property a number of times and presented us with some short-term, mid-term, and long-term changes. And we began informing the Huron community last spring of the fall changes to our drop-off and pickup, which included all car traffic coming on the Fuller Road loop and the bus traffic going on the Huron Parkway loop. And we did a lot of education. We did voiceovers, we did maps, and we continue to do that with our families. And the success has been that we have a much safer campus. Our campus, we've separated the bus and car traffic, and we have seen really much improvement in that area. The first day was a little challenging, but really by about the third week, things were picking up. The principal reported to us that she actually saw fewer tardies compared to the year before. So we were really appreciative that families were leaving earlier and getting students into the area on time for school. One of the things that we've noticed over the past number of years is that the student drivers has drastically reduced. Huron is one of those schools. We have a student lot that at one point, a number of years ago, we actually leased land from U of M to increase that. That doubled the size of the lot. That lot used to be filled. That lot is now barely a quarter filled. So we have a lot of single car vehicles dropping off students, which is just sort of a different phenomenon that's transpired. But we also recognize that with this change of our drop-off and pickup locations, we did change the traffic along the street areas. And I should also mention that we work very closely with the city, the traffic engineers through this whole process, making sure they are aware, they have a copy of the OHM report. And so we have seen some increases in what we know is an already busy intersection at Getty's, Fuller, and Huron Parkway. We've been working at doing some different things. City has been very helpful with us. They've changed some of the timing in the morning and afternoon at the lights. And we're talking about a 10-minute window in the morning and the afternoon when we see our traffic increase for the drop-off and pickup. We saw an increase in ridership on the routes that serve the AAATA routes that serve Huron High School. And we are still encouraging our parents to, when they pull off the Fuller Road into the loop, to pull all the way forward. That can take about 25, 28 cars. For some reason, they're a little challenged. They pull in, they make one little curve, and they feel the need to drop off their kids. So we actually hired a staff person that's out there, especially in the mornings, guiding traffic in. And we're seeing improvements in that area. We did have OHM come out again to take a look as we were experiencing the startup of the year. They made some suggestions, including creating a three-way stop at the further exit entrance off of Fuller. And we are also looking at some improvements for next summer, including the potential of a roundabout at that exit to keep the traffic moving as they come through Fuller Road and then out at that light. So we're still fine-tuning. We really appreciate the parents. We know that this has caused them to plan more time in their mornings, but it's created a much safer campus for us. We also did some car and bus separation on Clegg's campus. That was a campus where the cars were coming in the morning in one location and the buses, and then they were flip-flopping, and it was becoming very confusing. And so we've just really isolated that and been more consistent throughout. We also did traffic safety and safe route to school study with Eberwhite, and that really was more on the property. We changed some of the bus flow and the parent drop-off flow there, and that's working very well. Some of our other safety improvements, and this is, again, most of it is just contiguous to the school campus, where we did our safe route to school studies, and that was at Angel, where we improved some of that signage coming off of Washtenaw. Dickin, within their parking lot area, we improved some of their no parking and their added crosswalks. King, we did some changes at their staff parking. They have limited staff parking, so we're trying to take advantage of as many spaces as we can there. Thurston, we did some new directional signs on the Thurston campus. I'll talk about some of the stuff that's happening off the campus in a minute. We also did some signage that has been much needed for years around the Nature Center there at Thurston. A2 STEAM, we did some different drop-off patterns on the campus, including blocking off the Barton entrance area, because that was a very congested area of parents trying to get out to make turns out back onto Barton. And we just did some crosswalk refreshers on the Mitchell-Scarlett area. We did do some safety protocols improvements over the summer, including our principals were so excited to get their yellow vests. So principals and assistants, you'll see them out there in their yellow vests, but it makes them much more visible and gives them a little bit more authority when they go out there and directing traffic. And then we also did a small revision, but it was an important revision to our AAA safety patrol protocols. As I was taking a look at those, and I would go out there with Sergeant Clark and Officer Adkins and Cynthia Redinger, and we'd see safety patrols out there, and we'd see them doing the exact opposite of what our pedestrian law is. We'd see kids, stopping and then waving the cars on who were stopped according to the pedestrian law, and so it became a real standoff in a lot of the areas. So we tweaked that, and we trained the staff members at our schools that are in charge of those safety patrol programs. It doesn't mean that kids are walking out, they're waiting till the cars come to complete stops, but it just coordinates with what the law is. We've already had our first month of walk and bike to school. This is sort of a partial list right now. October seems to be the time of year. Well, it is October, and then in the spring again. We're getting more and more schools participating in these bike and walk to school programs. A2 STEAM had just a great turnout. They had just under 400 participants, and they did some bike trains from Carrot Way. They did a Northwood bike train. They had lots of walkers this year, so they are looking to try to sustain those. Baugh Elementary did one. Clegg Wines is doing a Walktober month, and so every Friday in October they're doing something. Thurston will actually do theirs this week, and Burns Park made sure that I knew that they do this every day. So, got it. Moving on to the initiatives that we work really closely with on the city. And we have an agreement with the city now as far as an orange flag crossing program. If you're around the Burns Park area, you'll see one there. And these are orange flags that are put in areas where we don't have crossing guards, but they're still fairly well trafficked areas. And parents or kids grab a flag from one of the adjacent buckets and they wave it as they cross. And we've had a lot of real good success with that. And so we have an agreement with the city. The police and traffic engineers go and check the locations before we give approval to do those. And Dickin is putting a couple in right now, and A2 STEAM is putting one in. So we're checking appropriate areas to continue that type of program. We are working with the city on the proposal right now of the relocation of the Fuller Road crosswalk. We will be at the city is having a public meeting on November 1st at 6 p.m. at Huron High School. And today, I actually was with two city traffic engineers. We did a student engagement at Huron High at their two lunches, and it was pretty amazing. We had, almost 100 kids stop and fill out a form, and they had just really great insight and explaining, what the proposal is, why this is being proposed. They gave us so much information, and I know I'm not trying to rain on the city's parade because they're going to be announcing this, but it was just, I talked with one kid for, I think he spent his whole lunch with us talking to us, and he asked really insightful questions, including how is this being paid for? So it was really, we walked out of there very encouraged of the smart student engagement that was happening. They really are concerned about that area, and they want to see improvements there. So we will be continuing that and as part of the city's plan on November 1st. We've got some future upgrades planned with some crosswalks, refreshments around Dickin Elementary on Dickin Drive in Waltham. Thurston, we were really really happy this year. Thurston is one of our schools. We have many of these schools in this situation, but Thurston is sort of busting at the seams. And they've done some really innovative things like remote drop-offs. They've got buses that are dropping off at a couple of different remote locations, and the students are walking in to school from those locations, but we still have a lot of traffic on Prairie. So we added the city added some additional no parking signs at Renfrew off of Prairie, and some bump outs were installed at Prairie and Renfrew and Prairie and Aurora. Those have proved very, very helpful in ensuring that our walkers, and we have a lot of walkers in that community, slowing down the traffic. Those have worked. Those are clearly safety devices that have worked well for us. We have been very supportive of a safety proposal initiative at Blewett and Antietam to create a bump out and a crosswalk. That is on hold right now. The residents there are not in favor of that, and we have been out there with the city a number of times talking and hearing the residents' issue, but we still have a number of Thurston students that come out of the Thurston neighborhood and cross at that location, and it is a safety issue for us still. And then we had some new installation of ramps and crosswalks for A2 STEAM at Perrin Taylor. This is where Raymond will help join in here. You may, if you know that A2 STEAM 3 or 4 years ago received a TAP grant from Michigan, through Michigan Fitness, which is who runs the Safe Route to School program for the state. And that was a grant that included sidewalk gaps, installation of sidewalk gaps. And so we've been meeting with the neighbors in that area. The city has been meeting, and the school district takes part in that. There was a meeting in June, and then again the week before last with the neighbors. And there is a lot of opposition to improving these sidewalks and closing the gaps in that area. And I don't know if, Raymond, if you wanted to speak to that at all.
Yeah, you took all my thunder. So yeah, I think what I was going to highlight is that the second public meeting was held on October 4th. We're currently summarizing the feedback that we heard and trying to make sure that we're addressing the concerns to the extent possible. We really tried to, some of the initial concerns that we heard had to do with the initial proposal was pretty heavy on some of the engineering solutions, and so we went back to the drawing board, tried to mitigate some of those impacts by readjusting where the location of the sidewalk was so as not to impact trees. The project was also scaled back significantly, so then that way the cost per property owner, because this would be an assessment on property owners, was reduced significantly as well. And so we tried to make some changes based on that. So now we went out on October 4th with kind of the latest set of plans, and really want to hear, and now we're compiling that results before we take it back before City Council, which is projected to be on November 19th.
And just sort of a wrap-up of what we're doing this year. We are increasing our Safe Route to School teams at our schools. We've already started the Dickin team, and A2 Open is starting a Safe Route to School team as well. We also asked OHM last spring to come onto the Pioneer property, specifically the 7th Street drop-off area, where again we have that mixing of car and bus traffic. And they have made some proposals in that area, and we're reviewing those right now. We also are working on a traffic control order for cars to not make a left-hand turn coming out onto Stadium from what we call the clock tower entrance of Pioneer. Again, they left turn, and it's during the school hours only, but they left turn right into a crosswalk, and so we're looking at right turn only, and we're working with the city on a traffic control order for that. This isn't in the city, but I'm just going to mention that our one school in the township, in Pittsfield Township, Carpenter, we are actually planning on making that a K-8 school over the next three years, starting next year with 6th grade. And it's going to be an interesting challenge for us because that's a neighborhood that has almost 0 sidewalks. And so we are working this year. This is our planning year before we move into that. And so we have a lot of best practices here in the city that I'm hoping to convince the township to implement as well. I'm looking forward to implementing an arm of the city's pedestrian safety campaign and using that in the schools to help with our staff and our parents and doing more education and our students on pedestrian safety and working towards that later this year. And then I just wanted to mention a few other things that are not directly transportation related, but areas that we cover within my domain includes working with the police department on our ALICE, which is our intruder protocol training. We train all staff in the ALICE response protocol. We've started that this fall. We'll finish up on November 6th for all of our staff who have not yet been trained in that. We did a school safety assessment with an outside company this spring, and some of that did include some of our traffic areas. They just really comment on it. We work with traffic engineers on those. But all of our schools have been assessed for their facility safety, and we're implementing some changes in our district based on that assessment. We're going to be implementing a mobile safety app in our schools, which will be a free app, and it'll be another way to communicate with parents and with our staff during any type of emergency situation, as well as a visitor management system at all of our schools. We're going through that process right now of looking at vendors. So I just wanted to add a few of the things we do besides just transportation safety. And that is, I don't know, Raymond, if you have anything else to add?
Well, the one thing that I wanted to add is that, we enjoy a very good working relationship with the schools. Oftentimes it's on a project-by-project basis, but one of the things that Liz and I are trying to do more regularly is just regular check-ins. So we've set up monthly meetings where her and I sit down and talk. One of the things that I'll say, because she's too humble to come to her own defense, oftentimes the reason Liz hasn't made it to the meetings is this meeting conflicts with school board meeting. And so she often, her obligation sends her to that. So what I will try to do, even though I will be a poor substitute, if Liz cannot make it to a Transportation Commission meeting, I'll meet with her leading up to this meeting. I can get some updates. We'll share that information in one way, shape, or form. If this group has questions, then I can take those back to Liz and get an answer, or see if she can send someone to answer those questions in the future. So I know, in past meetings there's been some discussion about making sure that we keep the dialogue open with schools because, of the transportation issues that oftentimes surround schools. And so I just wanted to let you know that we're trying to be responsive to that. I've set up regular meetings, and we're trying to figure out a way that we can kind of share presentations similar to what Liz gave tonight, even if Liz can't make it to the meeting. So just wanted to kind of let you know that we're working to keep that information flowing to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I do apologize. It was a very busy summer, and it seems like we never have our Wednesdays off very often. And I do want to just echo, I think our relationship is just excellent with the city. I think I talk to them sometimes more than I talk to some of my fellow principals, but I think we've made some really great strides fairly quickly in the changes, and the city's dedication to safety for our students is just really above what I even expected, even though I've been a resident here all my life, and responsiveness to issues that come up, and really I think we tag team a lot on those, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. We have time for questions and comments. Well, I can start while you're thinking. What I keep hearing over and over again is that parents are the main problem. And I'm just wondering if there is a focused program or something in the future about really working on getting kids to school in other ways other than having parents drop them off.
Yeah.
I see it as sort of a sub-theme, but I'm wondering if it's getting more prominence soon.
And that's really what our Safe Route to Schools teams are, and every school is required to have them. We're gearing them up, and as part of that team, we look at where all the students come from that school. We look at the ability of the walkers, and we develop safe routes for the walkers, and then we share that. It's an education process, and that's our goal. Our goal is to get kids to walk, to bike, to carpool, to have less single vehicles coming up, riding public transit at the high school levels where they're available. So it is a multimodal thing, and these committees contain parents, and they are sort of people we're actively asking to help promote this. So that is most definitely being done. And then as far as additional education, I'm looking forward to using the city's pedestrian safety plan and implementing that in our schools as well. Because it is an education, it's a change of behavior that we're asking for a lot of families, and some are really good at it, and some just takes a little bit longer. I should just add real quickly, when we made the change at Huron, I went and spoke at their PTSO meeting, and it wasn't a PTSO agenda item, but they wanted to hear, obviously the first meeting of the year and the things they had heard. But that gave them, they were like, well, we need to sponsor carpool. We need to sponsor biking. And a couple parents there said, our kids have started biking because it's just quicker for them. And it gives them a little more freedom. So working with the PTOs, the PTSOs are those avenues as well.
Great. More the better.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question, which, is there a mechanism for the Safe Routes to School committees to then be feeding back recommendations to the city and the pedestrian safety stuff so that, for example, if there's sort of a missing crosswalk that would create a safer route to school, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I didn't go into all the details, but as part of those Safe Route to School committees, or teams in each of the school, Sergeant Clock, Officer Adkins, and Cynthia Redinger team up with us, and we actually do walk-arounds, including the neighborhood streets, and we identify, and a lot of these improvements that happen over the summer happen because of those initiatives. So it's a joint effort, and so they are part of our team, and I really appreciate them going out there and doing the walk-arounds. We first sort of put our priorities together, and then we do, like at Dickin, we've already actually done some changes there, but we'll be back out again on some of the neighborhood roads, but that is part of the whole process. They're part of the team.
And if I may add, I think one of the lessons learned, especially with A2 STEAM, is just better ongoing coordination between what's coming out of the Safe Routes to School task force at the school level, making sure that we're coordinating at the neighborhood level, and then if there are other stakeholders and partners that need to be brought in, that we kind of continue that dialogue going on so that there aren't conversations that are happening in isolation. So I think that was a teachable moment for us.
Yes.
And so I think it's something that we hope to improve upon with future Safe Routes to School programs.
Most definitely. When I talk about parents, it's important for us. We have our neighbors. And in a lot of our neighborhoods, a lot of our neighbors are retired or don't have students in the district anymore. And so we we institute or recommend some of these changes, and it has some impact. So we are most definitely committed to making sure that our neighbors are aware of those things as well.
I just want to say thank you, and it's encouraging to see what the schools and the city have done together. I'll also reiterate what Linda, Diane, and Molly have said, and I think Brad said this in the past, which is that I think the schools are a great opportunity to really push our traffic and transportation safety initiatives forward. And that Safe Route to Schools is obviously the main mechanism we have for that right now. I just would like to encourage the schools in the city to be able to think, to think as big as we can with limited resources. It's not just about, I think Brad said in the past that a low stress bike network or a connected pedestrian network are important for doing things like what Linda, Diane encouraged, which is, trying to remove as many drop-off activities as possible, as many vehicle trips, single occupancy vehicle trips. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think even along the lines of our new transportation options that are coming online, with scooters and, and just, adding bike shelters, there's a lot of opportunity beyond, I think, what we're doing now, and I don't think that's a reflection on the efforts of the city or the school. I think that's just to mention that there's a lot out there that we can think about.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to get back with the Biking Alliance. One of the things that we really need are sustainable volunteers to help with some of our bike trains. And that's a hard one. Some parents are able to do that, some aren't able to do that, but same with our walk trains. That's when parents feel more comfortable to let their kids walk in some of the areas when they know there's a concerted effort. We're seeing some of that change up at A2 STEAM because they're very dedicated up there and because it's very crowded up there. and it's just going to get more crowded with the traffic. So sometimes you get those situations where your traffic just gets so bad that they are sort of forced into these modes. And I don't like it to happen that way, but then they become the models, and we can use those with other schools.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. It was very helpful. I want to echo Cyrus's point about having an effective or attractive and plenty of bike parking. I think that's lacking at some schools, and so I hope that becomes part of the piece to make that a little bit more attractive. And then I just want to ask a question about Community High School, which wasn't on the list and is currently a big construction zone.
They've actually been our stars this fall. The Fifth Avenue, you know, the construction going on there, the DDA and the city have been, you know, really hand in hand with us through that. And it's a few little glitches here and there, but parents they've just been great. And that's my 3 sons went to school there, so I'm very proud of them. But we've changed the drop-offs. We've had to make some changes on site there. The students have been great. And as a benefit, our campus there is going to get some really nice new seating areas, a couple of rain gardens that the Ecology Club is going to maintain, a new basketball court. And, you know, that's a great example of, you know, they're an urban school and they're part of that community. And so they really understand that a little bit of pain, a little bit of, you know, having to turn around in the parking lot to get out of the one-way. But the coordination has been really very, very well with the city and the DDA on that project. So.
A quick comment, I just wanted to follow up with what Cyrus had mentioned, and I appreciate all the comments. Liz, I very much appreciate what you're doing. I do want to point out in the latest submissions for traffic calming that Fernwood has now requested traffic calming, and I'll just remind folks, I mean, as Cyrus has said, I keep saying it, that is also on the Google Maps as a bicycle route. It is in front of Scarlett and Mitchell schools, and clearly there is a car problem that I'm afraid bike trains aren't going to solve.
Right.
That it's a bigger neighborhood issue that I think we need to start tackling it with a larger scale. Thanks.
Other comments or questions? All right.
Great. Thank you
for that.
Yep.
I have to open up my agenda, I'm sorry. So next we have staff report.
Yes, Madam Chair. So
Yes.
as is standard practice, I'll just go through the changes that have happened from last month to this month in the transportation project update that's included in your backup. So the first note that's at the very top of the report is that the labor dispute that happened in September and put a lot of projects on hold has been resolved. So projects are back up and running. The good news is the projects are back up and running. The bad news is there's been about a month delay on a lot of the projects. So you'll just go through and see that if before it said the project was scheduled to complete in October, it now probably says November. If it said September, it now says October. So I won't highlight all of those changes because they're fairly straightforward, but we are happy that that labor dispute has been resolved. Let's see, moving down to the second page on 7th Street. I just reported to you that at last meeting that we had sent out postcards to the neighborhood polling whether or not they would support removal of parking for buffered bike lanes on 7th Street. We did get the responses back. We were able to analyze those, and there's overwhelming support among the neighborhood to keep the on-street parking. So I've gone back to our design team, and we're currently looking at some alternatives that can try to balance the need of the bicycle network system as well as the desire of the neighborhood to keep that on-street parking. And so I actually just got a new design concept this week that I haven't even had a chance to look at yet, but I'm going to review that and see if we can move that forward. So, so stay tuned on that. But again, trying to find a solution that can keep that on-street parking. Next, I just want to draw your attention to, and you know, Liz touched on some of these, but the rectangular rapid flashing beacon installation, the RRFBs, those are all done this year. So the one on Fuller Road at Fuller Park, Packard Road at Highcone, and Maple Road at Pennsylvania. Those are all done. The one exception is we had another one identified at Green and Greenbrier, kind of near Baxter. That one was planned, but due to some concerns about the relocation of a bus stop, it required a lot more coordination with the housing community that's there, the AAATA, and the city. And so we have a new design and a new location for that crosswalk and that RFB installation. So we're continuing to work through that, and it looks like we're getting close to a solution in terms of how we can get that implemented. Next is the Nixon Road Corridor Improvement Design. I think a couple months ago, maybe it was September or August, you heard from Chris Wall, who gave you an update on Nixon. We are going back for the second round of public meetings on October 24th at 6:30 p.m., so that's a week from tonight, at Clague Middle School. It's going to be held in a workshop format, so it won't necessarily be a presentation. There'll be several different stations talking about different aspects of the project and different intersections and what's being proposed for those. Commission members are invited and encouraged to attend. Once again, October 24th at 6:30 p.m. at Clague for Nixon Road Corridor Improvement Study. Next, we have the Fuller Road Sidewalk Extension. So, City Council postponed decision on this item until November 19th, requesting that staff conduct additional public engagement. You heard today from Liz about some of that engagement at the high school for the crossing there, and so we're going to go back out and figure out what is going to be supported by the community. The meeting, the public meeting is scheduled for November 1st from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Media Center at Huron High School. And again, commission members are invited and encouraged to attend related to that Fuller sidewalk and new crossing. We already talked about the A2 STEAM, so I won't give you that update, but there is new language in the backup for that. The People Friendly Streets Initiative, that's shortly after this meeting last month, the City Council did approve authorization of the Downtown Development Authority to bond the Huron First, Ashley, and William Street projects. So that project is moving forward. There is also some updated information about the annual right-of-way repair program by the DDA. They're just wrapping up miscellaneous fall repairs to improve pedestrian experience and access to downtown and sidewalk repairs and things like that. There's also a new section for the Ann Ashley parking structure expansion included in the backup. Currently, the DDA board is pursuing a 3-story, 400-space expansion of the Ann Ashley parking structure. The goal is to encourage development of surface parking lots in the Main Street area. In addition to vehicle parking spaces, the project includes expanded bike parking, improved stormwater management, LED lighting, and added capacity for electric vehicle charging stations. There's a lot of new language for the Ann Arbor Station. The archaeological investigation of the Fuller Road site is now complete, and we're waiting for the final technical report. We are also, actually a contract amendment was approved by City Council on Monday night to finalize the environmental assessment and take that to completion so that we can get what's called a FONSI, a finding of no significant impact from the federal agencies. So due to a lot of back and forth with Federal Rail Administration and others, there was a little bit of scope creep that happened on the project. We're confident, we're sure that this is the last time that that's needed, and we can finalize the study and come up with, again, a finding of no significant impact. We talked a lot about the traffic calming program, so there's more language in your backup, but again, we don't need to discuss that at any more length. Just a little update on the transportation plan update. We are very close to finalizing the contract with the consultants. And so once that project kicks off, probably in the next month or so, we're going to start getting together a stakeholder like steering committee, and we'll be looking for some representation from this commission as well. But stay tuned. We're going to engage this commission on a regular basis to make sure that you all have your voices heard as part of that update. Going back to trains, the Quiet Zone train horn noise study that we're currently conducting, we had a public field investigation and public meeting on October 3rd. Several dozen people showed up. We've heard kind of a mix in terms of what people think about train horns. Some people don't mind it so much. Some people actually like the kind of romantic notion of hearing the train horn, and then others, I'm going to speculate, maybe those who are closer to the rail line find it to be a fairly big nuisance. And so right now we're, again, compiling the results that we heard during that public meeting, and we're giving that back to the consultants so that they can factor that into their consideration when they come up with their recommendations. I believe that is my last update that marks the significant changes from last time.
Any questions or comments on the updates? Yes.
So Raymond, I got 3 things. One very positive and 2 just inquisitive, not mad Brad today.
I'll just take the positive one and I'll table the other 2.
So I was speaking with pedestrian advocates a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned how much they appreciate the gateway treatments and the RFBs, and they think it's making an impact on driver behavior elsewhere as well. And I tend to agree anecdotally. My commutes with my son it's night and day compared to what it was a year and a half ago at this time. So very, very appreciative of that. I'm glad that they're basically all in. That's great. There's, in the project updates, there's been road diets studies have been ongoing, and I'm just curious now, summer's over, were these being conducted? You know, where are we at? It's more of a curiosity question. The third one, though, is the most pertinent, I guess. The Fuller crosswalk seems like this has been like a year-long sort of battle now. People want it moved, people don't want it moved. I'm curious if the city is considering ways to improve the current location as opposed to moving the crosswalk, or is the crosswalk move the only thing on the table and we're trying to figure out ways to make everybody happy in making that move?
Well, my understanding is, you know, when we're going out for these other rounds of public comment, we want to hear the input. You know, there has been, from an engineering and safety standpoint, I think the concern is the current location does pose some issues. And so finding, you know, the new crosswalk remediates a lot of those or addresses a lot of those concerns. And so, again, we're going with ears open. We want to hear what people have to say. We want to make sure that the design that we come up with is most responsive to, you know, all the concerns that we've heard. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we're addressing kind of the underlying safety concerns that are out there in the first place. And so really trying to kind of find that balance like we do on so many of our projects to make sure that, you know, we can be responsive, but at the same time, you know, address the safety concerns that from a, you know, the engineering eye are needed.
So just a quick follow-up. I'm curious to hear the responses that students gave, but if the response that you're getting from the public is we don't want it moved, or the students are saying we're just going to ignore the new crosswalk, you know, is that part of the equation, or is the crosswalk just getting moved?
Well, no, I think the behavioral piece is definitely part of it, and I think even, you know, the engineering solution that ultimately would move forward, you know, again, per council and the other decision makers is, you know, making sure that it achieves the desired result, right? So, you know, there's a behavioral aspect to that as well as just, you know, engineering solution and, you know, paint and signs and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think you know, we are contemplating it. Again, I actually didn't attend today's meeting, but I talked to the folks who did, and there was a lot of good information, like Liz mentioned in her report, that we got today. So again, we have that meeting next week. We want to just go ears open, hear what folks have to say, and make sure that we can come up with a solution that addresses as many of those concerns as possible.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Bye.
Any other questions? Yes.
Trying to figure out how to say this. I don't want to blow out of proportion this a little bit, but the 7th situation where, you know, the immediate neighbors clearly don't want to give up their parking. I think from a zoomed out network perspective, especially for cyclists, we're seeing another sort of case of sort of concentrated cost and diffuse benefit, and so we're going to hear a lot of really loud, passionate people against removing a few parking spaces. We're not necessarily going to hear a cacophony from the entire city for removing those to create a much safer and complete bicycle network. And my fear is if we take this approach, we'll never be able to successfully create a safe enough bicycle network that we get to those tipping points of behavior where when we hear, oh, it's faster and safer and more convenient and gives me more freedom to ride my bike, so I'm going to ride my bike. And so I don't want to say this is like, you know, the line in the sand, but I do think it gives me some concern that, like, if that's the way we're going to address every little piece of the network that we hope to build, we're going to fall over on our face and have an incomplete network where ultimately people won't want to use it and we won't be able to change the behaviors the way we want to do. So I think I'm not proposing we do anything about it now. I worry about that tension going forward and figuring out, I think, politically and as a commission, how to steer through that is going to be difficult and tricky.
Yep.
Good response. Any other questions or comments? Yeah. Nope. Okay. Hi.
I was actually, Brad asked one about the road diets. I was curious to hear.
Sorry, I was trying to remember what the second one was, but yeah, I think for the road diet, a lot of the road diet stuff that we're working on right now is looking at the conversion that happened on Maple. So we did some travel time runs, we did a couple other things. And my understanding is some of the data had been collected on some of the other road diet projects that were being proposed, but we haven't compiled it yet into a report format just because there's been other stuff going on. And so this is one of those things that hopefully during, you know, once things cool down with the construction cycle, we can kind of move into more of a, you know, an academic exercise and kind of get back and, you know, do the analysis and the reports that need to be done that help set us up for the next construction cycle. So stay tuned. It's on our to-do list. It just, other things keep popping up, things that we thought we had finished that keep popping up. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for that report. Are there any reports from people acting as liaisons?
Can I add, sorry, under, because it's related to staff reports. So on your agenda, there were a couple of late additions to just close the loop on a couple of things that came to the commission before. So you'll find in Legistar a couple of other materials just as kind of communication items to the commission. The ordinance for the Transportation Commission is provided there. That was approved by City Council at the September 17th meeting. And so we'd shared before with you that that was being updated, and that makes Raymond here an official commissioner, you heard during attendance. And that primary change there, couple other small tweaks like eliminating Chapter 85, the taxi cab board, things like that. And then the other one is our 18275, that staff memo that I mentioned previously when I talked about traffic calming, but we brought that to you all and got some feedback from you. May have actually been at your last meeting, September meeting, and then it went to City Council. So just wanted to show you the version that went to City Council, which reflected the feedback that you provided.
Okay, thanks. Are there reports from the people serving as liaisons from other groups? Okay, and any communications from commissioners? Okay.
Actually, sorry, I had one question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is, but for, I guess, Scott from the Planning Commission, that was earlier this year that we got the presentation about the zoning, potential zoning changes for the transit-oriented zoning. I don't think I'd heard anything about that since, and I just wasn't sure if that's come up at all.
Yeah, there hasn't been any public forward progress on that. I think the planning staff has still been working on that. I don't sit on the ordinance revision committee, so I don't know if they've been doing any work on it. I don't know, Zach, if you know?
Yeah, I'm also on the planning commission. I do serve on the ordinance revisions committee. It was slated to be on our previous meeting agenda, but got pushed because of time. So we'll be discussing it in November. So more to come on that. We also will have 4 new members of city council starting on November 19th. And so it's unclear what the policy direction will be on that.
Great, thanks.
All right, so the next meeting is another one of these, it's not on the third Wednesday. So I'll draw your attention to the fact that it's November 14th. So it's a week early at 7 o'clock, right here on the second floor of City Council Chambers at City Hall. And if anyone has any agenda items to add at this point, or else you can contact Kayla and I, but our agenda setting will be happening fairly quickly for that meeting.
So I can share what's anticipated based on the work plan and other conversations.
Sure.
The work plan reflects that there would be a transportation plan status update for November, so I'll follow up with Eli and see if that's ready and work with Raymond on that, if that's ready for a presentation or more of just a written staff report update. The 2019 street resurfacing and related projects is on the agenda, so I've just emailed the CIP committee before this meeting today, and I'll follow up with you all in anticipation for that, so we know which projects that the commission is interested in looking at and hearing from staff about. We have a bike share presentation scheduled, so our new bike share provider will be in attendance at the November 14th meeting. And also, I'll plan to have your 2019 calendar and meeting dates. That's what I've got on the agenda so far.
All right. So if there are no objections, I'll call the meeting adjourned. It's adjourned.